Hey guys, and welcome to part 3 of creating a game series. Today we will be looking at our first enemy, the turret, and honestly the only ground enemy that I'm including as a default. We'll be looking at how turrets work and some of the settings that you can customize, including finally the types of damage that you'll be taking, fire rate, and other things. And then we will take some time to take an overview of how does the flying enemy AI work. We're going to be taking a look at the behavior tree and then some of the customization options that you have on the parent class. And then we will be taking a look at the idle behaviors, which are 3. I think that will probably be a good stopping point. The combat behavior should be its own video. That's going to be a lot longer, and that should be the next video. So without further ado, let's jump into Unreal. And before we do anything, I do want to mention that I noticed a little error last time on the previous video with the checkpoint system. I completely forgot to do something. So if you notice, if you're following along, that the checkpoint wasn't working right, the reason for that is because we forgot to do something. So if you click on the checkpoint, you'll notice on the setup that you obviously have the option of having the background music, which I'll explain later, the sound effects, that's the sound it makes as soon as you overlap it. There's some kind of music ID, a multiplier. This is going to be its own video for sound, but it's asking you two important things. What is the current track, and whether this is an on-track checkpoint or not. And that's important because the checkpoint will behave differently if you are using a checkpoint on a track versus using a checkpoint on all range mode. By default, we have this as it is an on-track checkpoint, but it does need you to specify the track. And we didn't do that in the last video. So click on none and click on select BP track. That's the only track we have. And if we click play now, let's just do a quick demo here. This is what we had from last time. I'm just going to take a little damage here from crashing, and then the mines hopefully will kill us. As you can see, I'm taking damage. I died, and now I should be able to respawn on the checkpoint correctly. And you can see that we just did exactly on the checkpoint. On the previous video, it was respawning on the current location, more or less. That's kind of the default behavior. If at the end of the day you don't have a track defined, then the template will just spawn you where you die, more or less. And that's what happened in the last video. I just didn't notice. So make sure that before we proceed, go to checkpoint and select current track, that's BP track, or whatever name if you decided to rename, but basically select this track. Okay. All right. So now that we know how things work, let's go ahead and let's just take out the let's go to BP track real quick. Go to a construction script, go to the mesh component, add spline mesh component. Let's make sure that we make that invisible now. So click on rendering hidden in game. It's just a lot easier to select things that are inside the track. I did it last video this way because it was an easier way to visualize that you were actually on a track. So now if you click play, you'll notice that it looks like, a lot better, right? You're just moving around, you don't see the edges of the track, but as soon as you exit play mode, you still see it, right? So if you're on the viewport and you press G to go to game mode, you can see the difference, how things are going to look in the actual game versus in the editor. So okay, so let's go ahead. I'm gonna just remove some of these mines. I don't think it makes that much sense to have so many mines scattered around. Just gonna move them a little bit here, maybe here, just to clear the area a little bit of the mines. And click save. And let's take a look at the turret. So the first thing we'll do is go to meshes, and then on the meshes go to enemies, go to turret. And why are we going here? Well, let's use the turret base. You don't have to. Obviously, the turret is an individual thing, but we'll go ahead and put a little base here. So drag SM turret base to your level. Put it anywhere. So I'm going to put it right here. All right. And then we're going to go up to blueprints, characters, enemies, ground enemies, BP basic turret. I'm going to drag it here. And we're going to try to put this on top of the turret base. Okay. And sorry, let's try to align it here a little bit. All right. And let's go ahead and turn both of them 180 degrees. All right. Cool. And now I press G, I can see that it is inside the track. And you'll see as soon as we start playing, then the turret will obviously start firing. So, all right, let's take a quick look at the turret options that we have here. I'm selecting the turret, and usually I'm just gonna hit setup here. Usually I have the section called setup. So if you want to filter through the rest of the stuff, just type setup here. But a couple of things you can do here. And actually, I'm going to take out setup here. You know, what is the mesh that you will be using? The mesh material, and right now it's this white. So let's go ahead and make this yellow. Fine, let's just keep it yellow for now. Actually, no. Let's make it. Let's see here. All right, let's just keep it yellow for now. Seems kind of silly, but it'll do for now. Okay. The option of whether it shows up in your radar or not, and that's the little green radar that you see there by default. The way the turret works is it's not constantly active. So there is a trigger, and you can click your show trigger, and it'll give you the. Oops. You can see the trigger right here. You have to be out of game mode. It's basically a huge box collision, and you can click on show trigger or not show trigger. And basically, when the player overlaps the trigger, the turret will become active. The reason for that is because the turret is constantly monitoring the player's distance and location, so it can rotate and then start firing. So you don't want the turret to be active all the time if the player is really far away. So that is the reason for having a trigger. Obviously, you can resize the trigger. You can just come here and physically resize it. So if you want the turret to have a really long range, you can resize it. Or if you want them to have really short range, you can do that as well. So it is using this trigger. By default, I'm not showing the trigger just because when you start overlaying turrets, it just becomes really annoying. But it is there. So I'm not going to touch this setting. I think this is a good distance. Then you have the option of having the turret add points, meaning when you kill the turret, does it give you points? Right? These are going to be the hits that you see on the HUD. And if so, how many points do you want it to add? And you're going to see this option in the flying enemies as well. But basically, do you want killing enemies to give you points? And remember, once you hit 100 points, then you'll get an extra life, right? Again, we're going to leave this as is. We're going down to fire rate. And this is how many times or how often does it shoot in terms of seconds. So this is a fire rate of 2, meaning it'll fire every 2 seconds, right? So every 2 seconds, it'll fire. You can obviously make this every second, every half a second, whatever, and it'll continue firing, or you can make it, you know, every 10 seconds. So play around with this value to see what feels right. The turret will continue to track the player, but it'll only fire using this fire rate. Then you have the health variables here, meaning how many hits can the turret take. And right now the default is 4 hits. So if you're looking at just shooting the laser will do generally 1 hit or 1 point of health. So 4 means 4 laser shots. If you're using the fireball takes 2, I believe, and you can always modify those values, so it'll only take 2 fireballs. The charge shot or the homing shot does 5, which means that if you lock on it and shoot it, it'll die in 1 hit. And the massive bomb does, I think, 20 by default. I have to go back and see, but these are values that are by default. You can change them and tweak them. Point is, health is 4, and then health to change math. You see this in a lot of games. especially the old school games. Once the enemy starts to get low, the material or the color will change. So basically, when you know it has a health of 4, once it hits health of 2, meaning half the health, the material will change to a red, and you can specify the quote unquote hurt material. And then once it dies, how long will it take to actually disappear? And right now I have it at 1 second. You could have it explode immediately, or you can have it kind of shoot the, it's going to explode, have the smoke, and then after 1 second it'll actually destroy the actor. Then we have damage, and there's a couple of options here. So I've kind of mentioned it on the last video, but let's just quickly talk about damage in the template. We are doing a custom damage event for the player, and we're using Unreal's built-in damage to do damage to the enemies. And the reason for that is by building a custom solution for the player, it makes it a lot easier to quickly modify the damage values and gives you options like this type of damage. So basically, there are 4 types or 5 types of damage that you can select that an enemy can do to the player. Crash damage, as the name implies, means how much damage do you take when you crash into a regular object, right? And you notice if we crash into one of the obstacles, you get you get hit by a small amount. Light damage obviously does a little bit more. Heavy damage does more. Shield break breaks your shield. This is the type of damage that the mines do by default. So it doesn't matter the size of your shield. It could be full or empty. Shield damage will literally just break your shield, right? And if you don't have a shield already, shield damage will do half of your health. So if you hit a mine and you have full shield, it'll break your shield. If you get hit again without a shield, it'll do half of your health. And then, of course, if you get hit again, then it'll kill you. And instant death, as the name implies, kills you immediately. So you can select what type of damage you want the turret to do to you. If you want a, hyper hard section of the game, you can do shield break, or you can even have one like do instant death. So if you get hit by the turret, you'll die immediately, right? So you have the option of this type of damage. You have the same option if you click on obstacle. And I know that I didn't share it before, but the obstacle, as you can see, by default does crash damage. You can very easily make it instant death. You hit this obstacle, it's instant death. So think about it if you want to have like lasers or lava or anything like that, any obstacle that would instantly kill the player, all you need to do is select instant death, right? And of course, if you look at the mines, you can see that by default, the mines are doing shield break. So simple enough. So let's go back to the turret, and all right, here we go. Keep going here. So those are the types of options for damage. You also have a projectile type, and I have normal, homing, and never miss. This is also available for the flying game, for the flying enemies. So we're going over this information now, but this is going to be the same for the flying enemies. So 3 types of projectiles are implemented. A normal projectile means that it'll shoot a projectile in the direction of the player at the time of shooting, right? So the turret will be constantly tracking the player, and it'll have a counter. At the 2-second mark, it'll just spawn a laser and will shoot it at the direction of the player. You can modify the speed of the projectile and little things like that, but this type of projectile is prone to miss the player quite a bit, because obviously the player is moving a lot. So even you shoot it at a direction of where the player was, but the player is no longer there by the time the projectile gets there. So this type of projectile is the default. And if you look at games like Star Fox, the enemies, the regular enemies, aren't meant to be really hard. They're just meant to kind of be fodder for the player. So a normal projectile will shoot, and it's very, very easy to avoid. And then you have the homing projectile, and this is using the projectile component that comes with Unreal, and you can make it a homing projectile. This will follow the player up to a certain degree, right? So obviously this is a little bit more accurate, and it'll shoot the player, and if the player doesn't do anything, it'll hit it, but you can still avoid it by outmaneuvering the missile. And you have never miss, which is a custom implementation. This is, as the name implies, a projectile that will follow the player and will rotate and weave with the player. So you cannot avoid this type of missile. The only thing you can do is outlive it, right? So every projectile has a time to live, and I believe the standard is 3 seconds. I have to go back and check, but the only way to avoid this would be to outlive the projectile. Otherwise, you cannot miss it. Then you have the weapon type. Right now, we only have two things for the enemies. You either can shoot a laser or you can shoot a fireball. And maybe later on in the series, I could try to implement a new weapon type, and then I can show you how to add it to the list, etc. So these are the main options for damage. And then you have options for pickups, right? So do you want the enemy to spawn a pickup upon its death? And again, this applies to the flying enemies as well. So going over this now will apply to the flying enemies. So the first option is, do you want it to spawn a pickup when it dies? And we're going to go ahead and say yes. Then you can say what type of pickup, and you have a drop down here. These are all of the different types of pickups that the enemy can spawn. So you can be very specific. You can say, well, I wanted to spawn a health pickup or a bomb pickup or a laser pickup, whatever it is. We're going to make this a laser pickup for now for purposes. Then you say spawn a % of the time, meaning do you want it to be 100% of the time, or do you want it to have a % chance of spawning? And if you select it, then what is the % spawn rate? So if you select this and you leave it at default, it'll spawn a laser pickup 25% of the time. So right now we're going to take that out, so it'll always spawn a laser pickup every time you kill it. And then you have a spawn method, and you have 3 different spawn methods. You have specific, which means that whatever you specified here will always spawn. You have random, which will, as the name implies, spawn a random pickup from this list. So you could get lucky and get a bomb. You can get not so lucky and maybe get points pickup, right, which is just 25 points. Or you can do smart spawn. And I went over this in one of my development videos, but basically smart spawn looks at the player condition and decides what is the best spawn to give the player, right? So if the player is at full health and full shield, basically it's in perfect condition, it'll spawn a double laser because you want an upgrade. But if the player's shield is depleted, it'll give you a shield. If the player's health is depleted, it'll give you a health pickup. And if you have all of that, if you already have lasers and bombs and everything, it'll eventually just give you points because obviously you don't need anything else. So let's leave it as specific and laser. We'll test this out, and then we don't have to worry about anything else. So for now, we are going to allow it to show in the radar. We're going to have a fire rate of 2, and we're going to have a health of 4. And it's going to shoot lasers that are normal and they're doing light damage. So if I click play, I know there's a lot of talking here, but if I click play, and you know what? Let's move this a little bit closer, so we can test it out a lot quicker, so we don't have to wait to test out this. Okay, and let's remove this obstacle. Oops. There we go. Sorry about guys. Trying to do this on the fly again. I am trying to have to show you the this turret without having this obstacle. I'm going to delete it here. Interfere, because we're trying to share, see how this works. So okay, so let's click play, and you see that it shot me again, right? And it keeps rotating and shooting me every 2 seconds. All right, so Let's go back here. And let's say we want the fire rate to be every second. But instead of doing lasers, we want fireballs. Simple as that, as changing the options here. And you'll see that it's now shooting a lot faster. There you go. Okay. So let's go back to lasers. But let's see that we want homing missiles instead. So it's going to be a little bit more accurate. So you can see that you can kind of dodge it, but you can see that the that it kind of keeps going around for a little bit. It is a lot more accurate, as you can see there. But you can still dodge it a little bit. So you can dodge it even though it tries to come back. See? Or you can try the never miss, and let's see what happens here. So you can see it's still hitting you. It's following you no matter what. So those are the differences. We're going to keep it at normal. And then now let's try to kill it. And you can see that it spawned a laser pickup, which is exactly what we said it would do. Let's go back and make the let's make the fire rate of 4, just to keep it simpler for us. And now let's try some of the other pickups. So let's say that instead of a laser pickup, well, let's do laser pickup, but let's do a % of the time. So I want this to spawn 50% of the time. Okay. So this time it didn't spawn. I try again. Nope. Obviously, this is actual probability, so it's still not spawning. Come on. And there we go. So obviously, this is why you need to play around with your probabilities. 50% doesn't mean that every other time it'll spawn. That's on average, right? You can have a streak like this where it just feels like it almost never spawns. So feel free to play with this. I found that about 75% is kind of the sweet spot. Almost always spawns, but sometimes it doesn't. But again, you need to play around and see exactly how do you want your game to play. You can make a spawn method which is random. So random would basically ignore your pickup type. So you don't worry about this anymore. And let's make this 100% of the time, just for time's sake. So we wanted to spawn a random pickup. It doesn't matter your ship's condition. And now it spawned a points cache. Okay. Now it spawned the shield. Let's see what else. Come on. And did a shield again. And again, this is just random. And now it did a laser. So that's random. And then if you do smart spawn, we will go over the actual code later on, but for the purposes of the video, it'll look at what you need. And right now, because I have full health, it'll give me a laser. So let's do this. Let's go to pickups and give myself a laser. So let's assume that, no, I already have a laser. So what's going to happen then if you already have a laser? Okay. So we already have the laser pickup. So what's going to give us? It's going to give us bombs. Because obviously our health is great. And then you can see we're shooting the bomb there. So you can see the health is great. And by the way, these warnings, I'm going to take care of that later. You shouldn't be able to see that. But this is, let's give ourselves some bombs here. Okay. So you got your laser, you got your bombs. Okay. And now it gives you just points because obviously you have everything else. All right. So let's just take that out. No need for the bombs, no need for the laser. All right. I think, let's see what else. Is there anything else to cover here? Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. Obviously, you can clone the turrets and everything else, but these are the basic settings for the turret. Do you want it to add points or not? What's the fire rate? Health settings, damage settings, and then if you even wanted to spawn pickups. So that is the turret overview. Now we will be going over some of the flying enemy AI. Actually, looking at the time here, guys, maybe this is a good stopping point. The video is already over 20 minutes long, so yeah, let's stop it here with the turret overview. For the next video, we will finally look at the flying enemy AI. That will require a lot more time. Again, the turret is just a simple blueprint. The flying enemy AI has its own behavior tree, services, etc. So obviously a lot more involved and a lot more options. So let's cut it here. For next time, we will take a look at the enemy AI overview, and then we will look at idle behaviors. Thanks a lot.